She lacks a bit in the area of... wow, really? Oh, fucking damn it. Oh, literally the second I fucking start. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Makari and welcome to another Warframe guide. Today we're looking at Valkyr, the kitty of destruction. Now, Valkyr, summarily as a frame, is very tanky, she has a lot of survivability, she has some very interesting abilities that can combo together to make some really unique plays in the game. She also has this insane level of damage as well, which we'll go into in a bit. Now, in terms of Valkyr as a whole, there's a couple of builds we'll look at. We're going to look at her abilities, we're going to look at what they do, and then we're going to look at how she plays out with these set abilities. So the first thing to know about Valkyr is her passive it's not exactly amazing. It's a 50% faster recovery from knockdown. And if you can stack that with handspring, constitution, etc., you basically never get knocked down. It's pretty ludicrous, really. But realistically, you're probably not going to use those in most cases. Now, let's have a quick look at her abilities. We'll read these abilities out, we'll see what they do, we'll have a couple little bits of informative trivia about them, and then we'll actually put them into practice. So, Ripline. Have you ever wanted to be Spider-Man? Because Ripline is got ya. So Ripline, in summary, will tug you places. You fire Ripline will latch onto something and pull you in that direction. Now, the range that this thing can hit is based on your range you build, and it allows you to also pull targets, kind of like when Spider-Man does the get over here ability. Now, there's a couple of interesting dynamics that come with Ripline. If you are able to affect a target with Ripline within a second of hitting the target the first time, you will deal double the initial damage to it. So obviously, this probably isn't something you're actively going to be doing, but it's a nice little bit of trivia to know. This is her utility. It allows you to get all over the place. It allows you to get to places that would be annoying to jump to otherwise, and it's quite nice to be able to throw targets around and remove them from a fight. Now, her other ability, Warcry. Warcry is a sort of like a buff. When you have this active, you're going to be giving yourself an armor buff and I believe there's a slight damage buff to it as well, but this is something that you use in conjunction with one of the builds we're going to refer to later. And this is actually, this entire build is going to be referring down to Warcry, and we'll go into that in a bit. Alright, so, Paralysis, it's an ability that you'll never really use too much of. It basically sacrifices shields in order to stun enemies, and it scales based on your shield strength. It's a bit weird. It's not something you'll ever really make much use of, because if things are dying and you're killing things beforehand, it's like crowd control is just not really needed, but it's a nice ability to have to understand what it actually does. And then you've got Hysteria. Hysteria is where most people play to, and it's one of the main builds we'll be looking at as well. Now, Hysteria will cause you to create a ring around yourself, which will start building, and as this builds, it will cause Valkyr to go into a mad rage. She'll summon these claws from her, which are then going to be dealing a large amount of damage, which is based on a mixture of your power strength combined with how you mod the claws themselves. Now, the build here is something that works quite nicely. It's a generic build. It's going to be good regardless. There's nothing really much to say about it. If you just want pure damage with a bit of speed on there, she goes super fast when she goes into this. Without going into the finer details to make this too complicated, this is going to deal a crap ton of damage. She also then has the ability of almost becoming immune to death in this ability. It's almost like a pseudo-immunity. And if you have, this is a channeled ability as well, so the longer you're in this, aka Havoc, thank you for that follow, my dude. She's basically, so as a more descriptive nature of this, the aura that she irradiates starts at 5 meters, and it will allow her to basically ignore most of the damage she would otherwise take. If she takes damage that would kill her, it would then not kill her, so to say. If the Hysteria then wears off and there are enemies that have dealt damage to her within her ring, that would then any damage dealt is then going to kill her, basically. But if you play this properly, chances are you're not going to ever see that because things are going to be dead before that happens. Or you'll be out of range. So something to bear in mind, when you're using Hysteria, where if you're running out of energy, or you're running out of time and you know it's going to fall off soon, move away from any enemy you've been attacking, because there is the potential of you then one-shotting yourself. I'm going to leave a link to some information about all these, because Valkyr is one of the more technical frames in Warframe. There's a lot of depth to each of her abilities, with a lot of calculations as to how much damage they can do. But to summarize in short, your 1 is your utility, your 2 is your buff, your 3 is a crowd control, and your 4 is immunity and huge damage. Alright, so we're going to have a quick look at these abilities now. We'll look at the Whiplash, the Rip Line, sorry. So the Rip Line will target a location and pull you in that direction. Based on your range and based on your other stats will depend how fast and how far you go. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can target this onto enemies and pull them in your direction. Most of the time you're never really going to see much use from this, as it will never really kill anything. The power strength ratio isn't huge, so it's never going to deal massive amounts of damage. But it's nice to be able to pull targets away if they're causing trouble, like if you've got Nox in a group or something's causing you issues. And you know, you can use the terrain to... Good lordy. That guy went far. You can see how powerful it can be. It's a very interesting ability, but most people just use it for the utility of dashing around all over the place. And if you get max range on this, it's got a pretty tremendous amount of range to it as well. Moving on to her 2, you've got the buff. This, in turn, gives you a ludicrous amount of protection. It gives you armor. It's going to basically be useful for a lot of things, especially if you're going for an Eternal War build, which we'll go into in a bit. Then your 3, which is your Paralysis. It deals a small amount of damage and will then cause the enemy to basically be held in place. It causes them to become stammered. Stammered? That's the word I'm using. Hey, this is live. I'm doing this off the top of the back of my head. And then you got your 4. Now, the Hysteria is where a lot of people build this character for. You'll see that there is a ring slowly starting to build up around me. The longer you're in this 4, the more the percentage of Hysteria will build up. The longer you're in Hysteria, and the higher the percentage of Hysteria gets, the faster and more damage you'll deal. Now, something to bear in mind about these kind of channeled abilities, when you're using channeled abilities like Hysteria, duration actually makes a direct impact on how much energy you're losing. Efficiency will reduce the amount of energy you're taking on each channel, but duration will lengthen the gap between each channel. So, if you have no duration, for example, you would lose, I don't know, just say example, 10 energy per second. If you then had duration on there, you would lose 10 energy every 1.5 seconds. And it does add up across the board. So other than that, the actual damage you end up doing is going to be pretty damn tremendous. So we'll get some energy back very quickly, and I'll just show you the kind of thing. This build I'm using right now is not tailored towards Hysteria at all, but we'll just see how much damage it ends up doing. And you can sort of combine. Oh, obviously these guys are passive at the moment, so they're taking a bit of extra damage. But even against passive targets, that's a lot of damage. That's a lot of damage. So we're gonna have a look at a couple quick builds here. The first build to look at is the Eternal War build. Eternal War is very interesting. Okay, let's read this out. So, Warcry. While active, Warcry's duration is increased by 2 seconds for each melee kill. So this almost indefinitely lengthens your ability of damage mitigation, buffing yourself, and buffing your team. This is a build that will clear almost all content, and Valkyr is super good for anyone to be able to clear content. I would highly recommend, if you're new to the game, if you haven't got Rhino, get Valkyr. Valkyr can deal stupid amounts of damage, and she's very, very tanky, regardless of what build you go for with her. This build more entails you to be using melee weapons as opposed to abilities. So you'll get your Warcry active, and so long as you've got a decent melee weapon attached, you will then be able to stay alive almost indefinitely. And you can actually push that even further by using a weapon like Legion and using healing returns. On a frame that has a lot of armor and a lot of health, Valkyr actually has 700 armor as a default. So if you're playing with Warcry, that gets multiplied even further, meaning you're going to be having such a huge amount of mitigation that even up to the levels of 155, you're barely going to be taking damage. And then if you add healing returns on that with Warcry, with Eternal War, you're never going to drop the buff, you're going to have all this mitigation, you're going to be dealing loads of damage, and it's going to carry you through most content. This build I prefer over Hysteria builds just because it has the long longevity. You don't need to worry about nullifiers as much, and it's very straightforward. And you don't need to worry about how damage calculates out. You don't need to worry about moving away. Some things in the challenge pointed out, the Prime version has 700, the base version just has 600, but case in point, she has a lot of armor. So that's her Eternal War build. You can be quite playful with these builds. Things like the health or whatever, you can sort of swap out as and when. Having Rush is really nice to be able to move around quicker, because she's moving quicker anyway because of if you do decide to use Hysteria. Steel Charge is just flat out melee damage. It's always good for frames like this that are very heavily based on melee. Duration is going to be the thing that affects how long your buff lasts for. But with Eternal War, you don't need to worry about it too much. Just having that bit of extra base time is good for if there's no enemies around. And then you're basically building purely for health, armor, and then a bit of power strength to make that multiplier go higher. Hunter's Adrenaline is an interesting choice. It's I would say something that's quite mandatory, because if for whatever reason if Warcry does fall off, this can be a bit of a savior to get some energy back, to act as a backup. And on Valkyr especially, it's a super useful mod to get. Moving on, we then have her Hysteria build. Now, this is a lot more down to personal taste. I find that this build here works quite nicely. You've got some power strength to push the power of her Hysteria up a bit higher. You've got the efficiency and a little bit of duration to lengthen that drain, so that it doesn't drain quite as quickly. In fact, Arcane Energize on this is super good as well. Then you got just some base damage, some base health, Prime Flow to increase your overall energy cap, so you've got more to pull from, and you can then pull away from that as well. So again, Rush because of speed, melee damage, whatever arcanes you can use Arcane Fury, Arcane Strike to deal that extra melee damage. Those ones would probably work a lot more for the Eternal War build. However, if you do have Energize, it's definitely worth using on Hysteria build. If I can find, there we go. Now, we're going to show these in practice a little bit. So, when you bring these builds together, what do you get? So, we'll look at the Hysteria first, and we'll unpause the enemy just to show you what kind of damage you'll be dealing. So, when you have, these are level 80 troopers. These will be about the average level of relevant content. So you're going to go in, you're going to start dealing an absolute crap ton of damage. And again, theyese are level 80s. They're probably the highest level relevant content you'll fight against. And with this build, you're two-shotting. The only trouble comes with this build, again, is if you run into nullifiers, or you don't get any energy, or with Arcane Energize, you'll be fine. This will have the potential of going further. But if you're doing generalized content, then I would highly recommend the Eternal War build. Eternal War will do all relevant content. The only time this actually has any trouble is if you're about to get one shot. Now, I'm going to put this into a state of the most extreme possible we can get from the simulacrum here. So we're going to fight against. Ooh, let's try bombards. We'll try some bombards. And then we'll get... Actually, let's see what we can get these Eximuses. Eximuses, again, are probably some of the more resistant enemies you'll fight. So, against very tough enemies, this should, as an Eternal War build, get your Warcry up. You go in, you start dealing damage with whatever weapon you have. You shouldn't really take enough damage to get yourself killed, but as you're in there, you'll start taking less damage. You'll start dealing it. Again, these are level 155, and they're pretty much falling away almost instantly. As you get your status procs going as well, if you were to take damage, it would then fall away because of the healing returns. The only time this build actually falls off is if for some bizarre reason you fight up against like a bombard that's level 160 or 170 and it ends up one-shotting you. If that's the case, it can be a bit of a pain, but so long as your buff is up, it's almost impossible to die. It's almost like having a permanent iron skin from Rhino. Which is why I absolutely love this build for general content. And it's why a lot of people will go for the Hysteria just because. But if you can put the time in to understand her Hysteria and understand the buff and the calculations therein, you can get a lot of potency from it. Now, something about the Hysteria build that I find absolutely hilarious is you have something called Hysterical Assault, and this is just a very fun augment which is absolutely not needed, but it's funny to use in any sense. So we'll show you this Hysteria build against these targets, and then we'll move on. So, activate Hysteria. You're able to jump on targets. This is just fun. It doesn't do much damage. It literally scales by power strength, but it does cause a small stammer, and it's just hilarious. Like, if you want to have a bit of fun, just jump on the enemy. Just jump on them. But then again, you're in your Hysteria. You're gonna start dealing damage. You're gonna go in. You're gonna start absolutely flattening them. Again, level 155s and their Eximuses, they don't stand a chance. You build up your combo multiplier. So long as you have your talons built properly, so long as you have your talons built somewhat decently, you'll start dealing a significant amount of damage the second you hit the 2.0 multiplier. What I would say is very recommended with this build especially is learn the combos of Hysteria. So you'll notice that with the talons you actually have a Hysteria combo. None of them are particularly needed to understand, but knowing these combos can make a bit of a difference, because some of these will give you cleaves, some of them will give you straight down the middle slashes, but in short, Valkyr is a super mega powerful frame. Don't underestimate her just because she's a little bit complicated initially. Take some time to understand her builds, take some time to understand the different playstyles, and choose the one that fits you best. With either build, you're going to deal a lot of damage, and with either build, you're going to survive a lot, so long as you function based on the builds you go for. So I hope that's been a bit informative. Hopefully this will get you into Star Doge, thank you for following. Welcome. Hopefully that's been instructive and a bit informative to give you an introductory guide on Valkyr. If you want any of the details about Valkyr herself, I'll leave a link to her wiki in the description. Look at the calculations yourself, see how mind-bogglingly amazing she can be, and decide for yourself whether you'd enjoy her or not. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll hope to see you in the next guide we do. Hurrah!